Hello and welcome to this edition of Türkiye Talks. As usual, I am joined by Kadir Üstün from Washington, and we have another guest again from Washington, Luke Coffey. He's the Director of Foreign Policy of the Heritage Organization. Welcome both. We are going to talk about Ukrainian-Russian conflict again. We have seen new developments and very important, actually, things happened this week. The incident in Bucha I'm referring to, many mass graves have been found. Also, we have witnessed Russian withdrawal or regrouping, as many analysts underlined. And also there was a UN Security Council discussion on the latest developments. This mass grave incident reminded me 1998 Kosovo Rajak massacre, after which NATO decided to start military operation. Of course, we are far from it in Ukrainian-Russian conflict, but this was a very important moment. I don't know, you guys, if you agree with that. Maybe, Luke, we can start with you. Do you think Bucha moment is an important moment in this conflict? What do you think about it?
Thank you for having me on your program today. Absolutely, the revelations out of Bucha mark a significant moment in this dreadful conflict. What it did was confirm with pictures and with video what everyone was assuming and suspecting, that these atrocities were taking place in areas controlled by Russian troops, that the lack of discipline by the Russian military, the lack of morale by the Russian military, and the lack of professionalism created this toxic environment where it became a free-for-all for these Russian soldiers to commit these atrocities. And not only have we seen hundreds of civilians dead, sometimes with their hands behind their backs, tied up, other times still attached to their bicycles, laying on the street. But we've also seen evidence of other war crimes, perhaps not as serious. The looting of private belongings. We've seen CCTV footage from postal offices in Belarus of Russian soldiers shipping stolen goods back to Russia. And so while this specific incident in Bucha was a wake-up call and it confirmed our thoughts about what was happening, I suspect in other places where Russia has control, like in Mariupol or surrounding Mariupol, or other places in the east, even worse atrocities are taking place.
Kadir, what is your take on this? This was a very important moment, but Russia denies what has happened. They say this is just fabricated by Ukrainians, but most of the speakers at the United Nations criticized Russia. What is your thinking about it?
I think it shows the lack of discipline in the Russian military. They were obviously not able to achieve the goals, and this kind of massacre doesn't happen in a sort of orderly, well-planned occupation plan. So Luke, of course, has military background. He would know much better on this one than me, but that's what it looks like to me. In terms of the images mobilizing the international community, I'm less optimistic about that because international sort of audiences unfortunately have become accustomed to such scenes from other conflicts around the world, especially from Syria and elsewhere. So there's a lot of outrage, but no serious action is sort of being taken, especially by the UN and UN Security Council. They put a hashtag on the screens, but the UN is increasingly under serious criticism. This is something we've known. It's been decades that United Nations Security Council has been under the influence of great powers, and their national interests often came first. But in this instance, especially, it is even more starkly right in front of our eyes. So in that sense, there will need to be a serious rethinking of the international system. It's already caused that, but especially with the UN, Zelensky's address to the UN has actually highlighted some of the themes that Turkey has been talking about for a long time as well. So, and I agree with Luke. I'm sure there's more massacres elsewhere, senseless violence, but that again shows the lack of a serious plan to take over these areas. It's turned into these, sort of practices that Russia did applied in especially Syria, bomb it from the air, surround the cities, suffocate them, leave them without food and supplies and everything, depopulate cities, and then take over. But in this instance, it looks like it's not even able to take over or even hold ground. In Syria, for instance, they would let Iranian militia and Syrian regime forces try to hold the ground of sort of unoccupied cities by then. But Ukrainians are fighting back, fighting hard, and some of the refugees are even returning to Ukraine. So this is a much tougher game for Putin to figure out. That's why I think he's trying to regroup and refocus on the East.
Yeah, this Bucha incident, occupied the agenda this week. But when we look at the Russian-Ukrainian crisis, I think there are some things that we should actually classify: the military situation, the humanitarian situation, and refugees and diplomacy. I think we should remember, putting Bucha aside, let's go back to military situation, as Kadir, you mentioned a little bit. I want to ask Luke to you, how do you see the military situation in the field? How do you analyze it? We have seen that after Istanbul talks, Russia agreed to withdraw, or they started regrouping. What is the situation in terms of military advance of Russia, or can we talk about a withdrawal or repositioning? In what stage are we right now?
The Russian retreat from their attack on Kyiv was exactly that. It was a retreat. It was not an orderly withdrawal in what you would find in any military doctrine of any professional military around the world. It was chaotic. They lost a lot of men. They lost a lot of equipment. They didn't have time to collect their dead off the battlefield. So it was not, although Moscow says that as a gesture of goodwill, they were withdrawing their forces from the capital area. It was not a gesture of goodwill. It was an act out of necessity. They had to do this. And I suspect that their ultimate goal will be to get rid of their maximalist goals, which they had in the beginning of this campaign, which was regime change, capturing the capital, capturing Odessa, basically capturing the country and installing a puppet government. I suspect they're going to get rid of these goals and focus more on realistic, achievable goals, predominantly in the southeast of the country. Now, some observers have suggested that Russia is pulling out of Kyiv in order to move these troops to the southeast to fight in Donbass. But it's not so simple as this. Many of us have watched too many Hollywood movies, or we played too many strategy board games. You're talking about thousands of Russian troops who have arguably just experienced the worst 40 days of their lives. They're tired, they're hungry, they're demoralized. everyone has probably lost a friend or a comrade. They've literally lost hundreds of tanks, hundreds of armored vehicles, hundreds of pieces of artillery. And these are just the ones that we have visual confirmation of, like we've seen video or photographic evidence of. So they've lost in total thousands of pieces of equipment, and they left many more behind in their hasty retreat. And the fastest distance by road to get from where they are in Belarus to the area around Mariupol is about 1,200 kilometers long by road. And that's assuming they have the fuel, the spare parts, the maintenance ability to get all their vehicles and all the personnel to southeast Ukraine. So if they are able to get all these troops and their equipment, or what's left of their equipment, to southeast Ukraine, it will likely take weeks. Now, they could move them closer to the area around Kharkiv, but again, while it might shorten the time it would take for these troops to get from where they are in Belarus to the area around Kharkiv, they will still have all the same problems about logistics, their broken equipment, their low morale, that they have as a consequence of their failure to capture Kyiv.
What does it tell you about the capacity, military capacity of Russia? I mean, from futuristic perspective, do you think this will have impact on Russian stand in the region? After this, I'm not going to describe it as a failure, but obviously it is not a success for Russia. What does it tell you about Russian military capacity?
It tells us that they have probably focused a lot more on their strategic defense, their strategic capabilities in the nuclear area, than they have on their conventional capabilities. And all of these large-scale training exercises that we've seen over the years, such as Zapad, for example, were highly choreographed. We now know this. Like what they were doing in these huge training exercises was not really training. It was a show that they were putting on. Otherwise, we would have seen a more coherent Russian military strategy in Ukraine, using all the combined arms of their military in concert with one another. And we have not seen this. So it tells me that we probably overestimated the Russian military capability. And right now, Russian soldiers that are in occupied Abkhazia, occupied Shkin Valley in Georgia, Russian peacekeepers, so-called peacekeepers in Karabakh, they're now being brought into the fight in Ukraine. This leaves these other areas that Russia has a military interest in exposed. The closure of the straits by Turkey under the terms of the Montreux Convention actually makes things very difficult for Russia in Syria. Not so much makes things difficult for Russia in Ukraine, because most of the maritime assets they need for Ukraine are already in the Black Sea. But that Crimea to Syria shuttle that goes back and forth with reinforcements, supplies, and logistics and goods, for all intents and purposes, is now stopped. So we are seeing a weakened Russia. But we shouldn't underestimate, I think, the Russian society's tolerance for military losses. In the United States, if in 40 days, if we would have lost or had killed or wounded or injured or taken prisoner 40,000 soldiers, and if we lost roughly 16% of our main battle tanks that we have in our total inventory, there would be a public outcry in America over this. People would demand that the war stopped. In Russia, maybe it's a lack of information or I don't know what, but for some reason you don't see the same level of public discontent. In fact, on the contrary, you see by some polling, Putin's approval ratings increasing.
Yeah. Kadir, what do you think about this? A few years ago, for example, in the Middle East, we were talking about Iran overstretch, when they were trying to do operations in Yemen, in Syria, elsewhere. Do you think we can use this term for Russia? Do you think Russia, with the Ukrainian war, is overstretching? What does it tell you? How do you think? What do you think about Russian military capacity after all this?
Well, I'm no military expert, but you know, from all the discussions we know, even for a power like the United States that spends the most on defense and military, you know, far bigger budget than any other country, even for the United States, fighting two wars at two fronts is very, very difficult. You know, it makes it very difficult. And at this stage, like Luke said, Russia has military assets in Syria, although, you know, military operations there are not as intensive, and it hasn't been that costly for Russia because it was essentially doing air operations, but it still matters, right? It has been sort of unsuccessful in its air operations in Ukraine in terms of, you know, achieving what it wanted to achieve, like compared to Syria, let's say. It's definitely not the same scene, of course. I don't want to make direct comparisons, but just to underline the fact that, you know, fighting several wars, several conflicts at multiple locations is very hard for even a superpower like the United States. So there's definitely an aspect of overstretch. And then, you know, most people, I think most analysts thought that Putin was going to focus on the Donbas region and the southeast and east of Ukraine, try to capture more of Ukraine after Crimea's, you know, annexation in 2014. So they, you know, most of us, including myself, we thought that, you know, he was going to go piecemeal. But once the United States, you know, said that there was actually a plan to invade the whole country, I think Putin felt almost like forced into it. I don't know if he was going to take his time, but anyway, we are way past that point. But he's realizing in reality, it is very hard to wage this war on multiple fronts around Ukraine as well. You know, so capturing Kiev is a goal. There's fighting in Kharkiv, Mariupol, you know, Odessa. These fronts seem to create really unique challenges, separate challenges for the Russian military, and it doesn't look like they were prepared for this well in advance. They probably banked on crumbling of the Ukrainian government, and that was probably the strategic mistake they made. And once again, we have to give it to Zelensky for staying and, you know, fighting. And of course, the Ukrainian military has been building capacity for a long time. They're not a, you know, joke of an army, and so they're fighting back. And I think Russia made many miscalculations. But I also want to concur with Luke. Their sort of tolerance for a prolonged war, protracted war, might be much higher than we think. You know, in the West, generally, we expect quick solutions, quick resolutions. You know, we want results, and we count the dead and count the numbers. And but for Putin and for the Russian society, those numbers, first of all, they're not the same numbers for sure, but they may not mean as much for them. It doesn't mean it's sustainable for a long time, but it just means, in my opinion, it's just the time horizon is going to be different. They may be okay with, you know, months long, even a year or 2 year long campaign to eventually bring Ukraine to its knees in their perspective. But there's a difference, of course. If the Europeans take this step against the natural gas, especially going into the summer months. If it's prolonged, EU and US will have time to adjust their energy dependency needs on Russia. So it's a catch-22 for Russia. The longer it is, the costlier it is, and then the easier it is for the West to adjust to the shortages of energy and foodstuffs and etc. and develop alternatives. So in that sense, Putin is in a pickle. But I think that's the realization that's pushing him to try to focus in the east, southeast, and then of course we should maybe get back to also the diplomatic side of it. Bora, let me ask you. There's been a flurry of diplomatic activity in Turkey. Turkey was able to bring together, the foreign ministers, multiple different sessions of negotiations in Turkey. Turkey says, we are not a mediator, but I think just a facilitator. But I think that role is kind of not just a facilitator, in my judgment. It's a bit more beyond that, because Turkey has serious interests, and Turkey is active as a NATO member, supporting Ukraine as well. So what is the perception on that, on those diplomatic activities in Turkey from a Turkish journalist's perspective?
Yeah. As a journalist and also, somebody who is following these political developments, we have been following what was going on in and around Black Sea for the last couple of years, especially after 2014. There was NATO deployments in Romania. There were NATO naval exercises, naval visits in the Black Sea, which Russia was watching with concern, and they were replying them with their own military exercises. Remember, sometimes we have seen dogfight between NATO planes with Russian planes. It was not a quiet place for the last couple of years, to be honest. And Ukrainians were waiting, and Turkey was following very carefully what was going on. And in a way, I believe Turkey was always ready to confront or reply to a crisis the one we are witnessing right now. Turkey was expecting that. Of course, Turkey has concerns. First of all, for the last 4 decades, we have seen wars and conflicts around Turkey. The Iraq War in 1991, again 2003, Syrian civil war, Georgia, Russian war. Also, we can add Azerbaijan fighting against Armenia in Karabakh. So these things took place around Turkey. And when we have such crises, it has impact on Turkish economy, Turkish security, Turkish social life due to mass movement of people from these regions. Also, we can add to that this Afghan crisis, the problems in Pakistan, Iran. So for Turkey, having another crisis in the Black Sea would have same problems. We have seen mass movement, not to Turkey, to Poland and other European countries, but of course this will have impact on Turkish economy due to tourism. We have guest tourists from Russia and Ukraine. This will be a problem probably. And also security-wise, as we all know, Turkey has invested in finding new natural energy resources in Black Sea. So in order to get this energy and put it in international market, you need a stable and secure environment. So if there is war going around you, it will be a problem. For this reason, Turkey is trying to, contain this conflict. And also, I think we should underline the fact that although Turkey and Russia has good relations, Russian expansion and projecting its power is not a good thing for Turkey. Turkey is also concerned about Russian growing impact in the region. As we have seen, we had problems with Russia in Syria, in Libya. So Turkey also needs to counterbalance Russian impact here, although on the other hand, Turkey has to try to protect its relations with Russia. So it's a difficult situation. That's why Turkey is playing an important role, as you have said, and the president himself declared that Turkey is facilitator, not a moderator. Turkey is not putting its own solutions as proposal, but of course Turkey is talking with both sides, and probably, as you have said, Turkey is sharing its opinions, views about the situation. So that's why I think Turkey became an important actor within NATO. That's why European leaders are coming to Turkey, meeting with the president. Foreign ministers are coming from Germany, Netherlands, and other places. Turkish president is in contact with Russian and Ukrainian presidents, and of course with NATO leaders. So I think Turkey has a unique position, and Turkey has vital interests in containing this problem with Russia and Ukraine. But I think, from what we have heard from Moscow especially, this Bucha moment may cause problems in this negotiation efforts. I don't know what is your opinions about it. Turkey still try to bring those two leaders to Turkey for negotiations, but I think because of this Bucha incident, maybe we have to wait more than before. What do you think, Luke, about it?
I agree with that. I think it's a combination of things. It's the Bucha incident, which is going to make Ukrainians less likely to engage in a negotiated settlement or a negotiated process with Russia right now. I think for your average Ukrainian, revenge is still on their mind, and understandably, especially when they see themselves gaining the front foot in several areas, not only around Kyiv, where they essentially defeated a Russian force of about 50 or 60,000 strong, including some of the most capable units from the airborne forces, but also in the south around Kherson, we're seeing advancements made on the ground, and the situation around Kharkiv, the Ukrainians are still putting up a strong defense. Now, if Mariupol falls in the next few days, this I think will be a tactical blow and also a morale blow to the Ukrainians. But I think because of the successes they've had on the battlefield and because of the horrific images we've seen in Bucha and other places and the scenes that no doubt we will see in other places as well in the near future, I don't think the Ukrainian line of thinking is necessarily in the place right now to have any sort of negotiations with Russia. I also don't think Russia is in a place to negotiate in good faith any peaceful settlement with Ukraine right now. I think we're just too early into the conflict for this. And the only winner, the only success out of these talks, I would say, has been Turkish diplomacy, which has been able to get these two sides at a senior level around the same table, and has really shown the way Turkey is viewed and I would say respected in the greater Black Sea region.
I I wanted to ask you a question, Luke. After Zelensky's speech, Biden administration announced another $100 million worth of military equipment to be sent to Ukraine. This policy of, on the one hand, punishing Putin's actions and imposing new sanctions, trying to cut the energy dependency on Russia, and then supporting militarily Ukraine, militarily. How do you see the future of this policy? Do you think it will simply help Ukrainians resist but not achieve concrete results in terms of, securing the Russian withdrawal? Or you think at some point it will, help facilitate or help enable the Russian withdrawal?
I think it could help enable better terms for the Ukrainians whenever there are meaningful and genuine peace talks between the two sides. Often you hear some critics in the United States say that by providing Ukraine weapons, we're only prolonging the war and prolonging the suffering. And I just find it so difficult to understand this line of thinking. Nobody's forcing Ukraine to fight. They have chosen to fight. And as long as they want to fight for their country, for their villages, for their families, for their towns and their cities, then as a partner of the United States, we should do everything we can to give them the tools to defend themselves. And I think it has been effective so far. And I think there's probably a lot more going on behind the scenes that we don't see. I think I hope that the US and the Europeans learn the lesson over the whole MiG-29 debacle, where everyone thought that the MiG-29s from European countries were heading to Ukraine so they could use them. And then all of a sudden the deal completely falls apart and then we look foolish and incompetent. I suspect there's a lot going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. For example, we now know that the Czech Republic has been transferring armored fighting vehicles and tanks to the Ukrainians, and they didn't announce that they were doing this until it had already happened. So I'm hoping we don't need to broadcast or tweet every single thing we're providing to the Ukrainians. We need to just do it, get it done, and get it into the hands of the Ukrainians as quickly as possible. And I don't see any change in U.S. policy on this. In fact, I think it's something like this: when Ukrainians enjoy such wide support in the United States and also bipartisan support in Congress. Now, don't get me wrong, there are a few of those on the fringes of the right and the fringes of the left who are against U.S. support to Ukraine. But by and large, the majority in Congress do support this. Considering all of this, I think the only way for the Biden administration is to keep increasing U.S. support to Ukraine. So I don't see any change in this other than the U.S. will provide more equipment and more supplies to the Ukrainians.
But do you think that kind of support without kind of a political or diplomatic roadmap, will it be successful, or will it be insufficient, let me say, in trying to bring this conflict to an end?
I think that remains to be seen right now. It depends on what sort of capabilities are given to the Ukrainians, how many of what different types of weapons are given to the Ukrainians. But I think everyone can admit that the Bayraktar drones, the Javelins, the Stingers, the in-laws provided by the US, Turkey, and the UK are having an outsized impact on the battlefield in Ukraine. And it's allowed the Ukrainians to be successful in places against the Russians that they otherwise would not be able to. You can take a $100,000 Stinger missile and shoot down a $20 million Russian jet, and this has happened. These javelins are destroying Russian armor. So this is having an impact, and I think the more we can provide the Ukrainians with these capabilities to defend themselves, the better the Ukrainians will be when it comes to actually having real peace talks with the Russians.
Okay, with this, actually we have come to the end of the show, but Kadir, do you want to add something to that?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Luke?
No, thank you.
Okay, so with this, we are going to close this show. We talked about Bucha moment, military situation in Ukraine, and finally, we analyzed the American position because the war is going on, the fighting is going on, and it is turning to a war of attrition. But we are going to see it's been more than a month. We are moving, I think, 1.5 months we have passed. So this is much more than especially Russians were expecting. But we'll see. Thank you very much, Luke Coffey from Heritage Organization, and Kadir Üstün, and myself, Bora Bayraktar. Hope to see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.